What's going on, everyone, and welcome into Plizzon's podcast, filled to the brim with glitchy analysis and freezing cold takes, so cold that they're boiling hot. In this episode, we are doing our college football preview. We're going to be talking about the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets today. Let's go ahead and hop right into the stars. We've got a couple of Hayneses to talk about. First, Haynes King, quarterback, dual threat. If there used to be a triple option that was run at Georgia Tech, and I think he would be a brilliant quarterback to put in that system, but they're a classic pocket passing team now, but I think he does a phenomenal job. And then to pair with him in the backfield, Jamal Haynes, the other Haynes I was talking about, 1,000-yard rusher last year. Very impressive stuff. When it comes to being dynamic, I think he's the guy, catching in the backfield, getting it handed off to him, either or, as well as picking up blocks, by the way. I think he could block pretty damn well. But overall, those two guys in the backfield. And then in the skill position group, specifically wide receiver, Eric Singleton Jr., wide receiver. This is going to be the number one target for the passing game this year. He is going to do a phenomenal job keeping Georgia Tech in some of these shootouts that they're going to be in, but it is going to be tough sledding for this Georgia Tech team. I'll get into that in just a little bit. On the defensive side of the ball, a transfer, Romello Height from USC, edge rusher. This guy has got to get to the quarterback this year if this Georgia Tech defense is going to have any hope or possibility of staying competitive against some of these really talented quarterbacks. He is going to have to sack them at least one or two times every single game. He's going to be the star to look out for on defense. Couple storylines I want to talk about. First up, Brent Key. Actually, from my hometown. Did not know that until I started doing my research for Georgia Tech this time. But yeah, shout out to Brent Key, Trussville, Alabama. He is the head coach there at Georgia Tech, and he's done a pretty good job of building up a storied program that used to be in the SEC that now has a lot of academic limits on how he can build, similar to a Vanderbilt or a Stanford. I don't think Georgia Tech will ever be, the premier college football program, but he's an alumni there. He's done a lot of good things so far. I like what he's doing. Just the going gets tough when you have to play teams that don't have the restrictions that you do. And on top of that, there's not a ton of NIL funding going around Georgia Tech, unfortunately, even though they're in Atlanta. So let's go ahead and keep talking about this team. The losses, in addition, they lost quite a bit on the defensive side of the football. First, Kyle Kennard, he goes to South Carolina. He was one of the better edge rushers in the ACC, and he decides to hit it to where a conference that it just means more in the SEC goes to South Carolina. Pair of corners, the two starters from last year, KJ Wallace and Jalen King. KJ Wallace goes to UCLA. Jalen King is he graduated, so he can't come back. He has no eligibility, so both of the starting corners gone. Now, on the addition side of things, you got Warren Burrell, who is going to replace one of those starting corners. He's from Tennessee. I'm not really sure how much playing time that he got. I've just heard some good things and some promising things about him in the portal. And then last but not least, I've already mentioned him, Romello Height from USC. I think that was a pretty good pickup for Brent Key and this Georgia Tech team. Now, second thing I want to talk about in terms of storylines, this Georgia Tech team is not to be overlooked. They went 6-6 last year. It was a really volatile season. I think they lost to a group of 5 team that they played out of conference, but then they also beat 2 top 25 teams. I'm not really sure how this Georgia Tech team works in terms of performing in games where they're the underdog, but then underperforming against teams that they're the odds-on favorite, of course. So they kind of remind me of Alabama men's basketball over the last few years. Play to the competition, but regardless, what I'm trying to say here is don't overlook them, okay? They kept it close with Georgia, and when you keep it close with Georgia, I mean, there's something to be said about being able to keep games close with Georgia. And I think it was on the road in Athens. So very impressive stuff. They are top 15 in the country in yards per game on the ground. Once again, a very impressive stat. But the last point that I want to get into is they don't eat up the clock, even though they're top 15 in running yards per game. And why is that? It's because they get gashed on the defensive side of the football when it comes to the running game. They gave up the 3rd most rushing yards. They also, this doesn't help, had the 4th most turnovers last season. They're going to have to cut down on the turnovers. They're going to have to clog the middle gaps of this defense because it is ugly. And that's why they have 6 losses from last season. In their 6 losses, they gave up 260 yards a game on the ground. Teams that ran the ball and beat them rushed for 260 yards per game. Nuts. Absolutely insane stuff. That's unacceptable when you're a Power 4 conference team. Georgia Tech's going to have to get that figured out. So, without further ado, let's talk about the record prediction. Last season, I thought Georgia Tech caught a major scheduling break, and this year, they did not. They have 5 top 25 teams on their schedule, and on top of that, they have 5 really tough road games. So to begin, let's talk about Florida State, neutral site game, I believe. That doesn't make any sense. Maybe I've got that wrong. Oh, yeah, maybe I've got that wrong on the schedule, but that's what it shows for me. Neutral site game, regardless whether it was home, away, or a neutral site. That is a loss to Florida State. Hosting Georgia State, watch out for that Georgia State team. They are sneaky, but I do give Georgia Tech the win there. I think they are improved from last season. At Syracuse, it's hard to travel all the way up north and play on the road. Syracuse is not a bad team whatsoever. I will give Georgia Tech the loss there. Hosting VMI, that's an easy win to me. Nothing to bat an eye here about or write home about. That's a win. At Louisville, Louisville's defense and their offense are both extremely capable. It's on the road. It'll probably be at night. Louisville is a dangerous team to play this season. That's a loss. Home versus Duke. Duke is in a complete rebuild, and I think that they're going to be vulnerable on the road. Mike Elko leaves. Their starting quarterback, Riley Leonard, leaves. Now, they did get Malik Murphy from Texas, but I don't have a ton of confidence in this Duke team. They also lost their starting running back, but I digress. That is a win I will give Georgia Tech. But then at North Carolina, Mac Brown may not be able to get North Carolina to the college football playoff, but when it comes to getting 8 wins out of that team, he's the guy to do it. That's a loss for Georgia Tech. Notre Dame, another loss. It says to me it's another neutral site game. Regardless, their team is stacked and teeming with talent. That is a loss for Georgia Tech. At Virginia Tech, they are my ACC title contending team that no one's really talking about. I'm going to give Georgia Tech the loss. They're going to get strangled on the road here. That defense in Virginia Tech is just so unbelievably underrated. So next up, we've got hosting Miami and hosting NC State. I think both of these programs are in different parts of a rebuild. And by that, I mean they're ahead of schedule compared to Georgia Tech. So those are 2 losses there. At Georgia to close out the year, I'm not sure that we'll see Georgia Tech beat Georgia again during the Kirby Smart era, especially not this season. That is a loss. 3-9 on the year. I don't know. The defense, it got better, I guess, but it didn't get so good that I thought that they could beat Georgia on the road, Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, North Carolina, Louisville. None of those strike me as upsets. They have 2 extremely out-of-conference hard games, or 2 hard out-of-conference games in Notre Dame and Georgia. Those are where the wins come from with conference teams that struggle in conference. They try to get those wins outside. They're not going to get that this year. So 3-9. They've got one more season with Brent Key, I believe, after this year. So we'll have to see where they go from there. But thanks again for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time.